Actually,
Don't put that photograph on Facebook. I mean, look like a ghoul. Come on. Okay, I get to curate it then. All right, good, fine. Are you ready, Gib? So, thank you all for coming tonight. It's good to see all of you. I have to say, maybe I don't know half of you. That's nice. Um, well, I mean, it's nice for them, not for me. But there are people who are here who I don't recognize who are usually here, Dr. Viren. Tonight, Ryan Scariano is going to go first. James Stolen is going to go second. I'm just going to introduce them both now, and they will make a natural transition between the two. Can you hear me on this microphone? Okay. All right. So um, Orion Scarliano was born in Missoula um, and moved to Portland when he was a year old, was raised in Portland, has a degree from Portland State, and studied poetry with Christopher Howe in Spokane at Eastern Washington University. Uh, until very recently, he has been driving a truck full of medical supplies, mostly oxygen and hospice equipment, uh, all around the Pacific Northwest. And it's so nice that you should be working here at EOU, helping freshmen mostly get more oxygen. And I'm sure that you are expert at that. Um, his poems have appeared or forthcoming in Fault Lines, which I think is California Magazine, Thunder Sandwich, J Journal, The Oregonian, and Criminal Class Review. I haven't heard about that. You think they would have contacted me by now. I'm pleased to have Ryan here as a colleague and as a reader. James Stolen is known to many of you who live here in the Grand Ronde Valley. He is a friend. I think, was born in Calcutta, was rushed away to rural Alaska, and then to civilization in rural eastern Oregon, the town of Cove, Oregon, where he was raised, was a friend of many young people I know from my own children's youth. Um, he was a student at Carleton College and later in the Peace Corps. in Lesotho and has an MFA from Virginia Tech. And he now teaches here at EOU, God willing, for all of eternity, and my eternity. His work has been published in the Bellevue Literary Review, other places, High Desert Journal. I know I've read some work of his. And he is currently working on a collection of short stories as well as a novel. Susan Anderson, who is sitting right here, I think must have gone on to rate my professor and somewhere, because there is a student evaluation here that I really have to read. James Stolen is an exacting teacher of fiction writing. He is generous and excellent. Did you hear that on this side of the room? He is generous and excellent. Not only that, a class from him is a life-changing event, and you will find yourself writing like you never have before. Professor Stolen is so widely read and has his finger on the pulse of contemporary literature in such a way that it will be an encouraging and unique experience to have him as your teacher. Ryan, James, welcome. I am so eager to hear from you both. Thank you all for coming. Welcome these two fine young men.
Wow. Yeah, I'm having a good time tonight. Gonna knock over my water bottle. Having a blast tonight. So hopefully I'll keep that going, and you guys will enjoy this. Yeah, thank you, Chris. Thank you, Jody and David for having me, and thank you, James, for sharing your time with me, and thank you guys for being here. So, okay, Grace. Heavenly Father and Mother, sister and brother, oh great and wise aunt and laughing uncle, thank you for bringing us to your table. Please watch over us from this moment forward. Guide us and our many long-lost cousins through day and night. Allow us to hear the song and smell the stove. Nourish our desire to share. Help us in our gratitude for the things we hold. Help us in our gratitude for the thing belonging to all. Witness our awe at being and having been. We implore you, grant us a sip from the cup of your grace. Also, in your absolute wisdom, we beseech your mercy on behalf of the lion that would eat us for his dinner, for we know his hunger is our own. Together at your table we give thanks for this divine hello and goodbye. Amen. Certainly, something shiny catches my eye as I cross the street to the car. A scuffed little disco ball bead. I toss it into the ashtray next to the tooth-sized piece of quartz, the starry green shard of sea glass, the paper clip, and 2 new pennies. Certainly, I am becoming a crow. One unexpected yes. She asks me to come splash in her river. She wants to mix me an ocean. Says she'll bake me a cake and roast me a mountain. She says I'll remind her that it takes 1 trillion no's to make one unexpected yes. The birth of a stone before the breath of light and space. I'm a leaf and a crow and a child laughing, singing of wind and rain as I reach into the drawer that holds the knives. She pities my less and less, ignores my more and more, always moving and waiting, a guest in her house, this desire, the gift I bring. I do a lot of driving at night. My girlfriend is in Tacoma. My folks and friends are in the Portland area. I was in Spokane before I got here. So a lot of these poems have driving and roads in them. This is a short poem. It's called Late Night 395 South. Like never before and never again, Muse Road snuck up out of the fog and kissed me. Bruised Muse. You sing along the rained and rutted highway heading south. On a hotel bed in Kennewick, I write you down. Your eyes hazel out into infinity. Help me craft it. Help me string words and twine spiral spokes of the galaxy in your breath. Help me polish these syllables. Tell me how much it reminds you. Tell me it makes you think of Hafez. Unpack your Hafez. You are the poem. When I'm with you, you sing along. I break off pieces and carry them away. This next short poem is called Vernal. Vernal. That's a rotten title, and I'm open to suggestions for a new title. So if anybody, yeah. If I don't tell her she's not a cherry blossom, that early morning moth fluttering in the small white breeze might get the wrong idea and become a tree. Northern Flicker. The snow whispers a lesson in letting go. The leaves are shouting from brown and gold to green and greener. They fall clear up into the sky. The flicker flares so brightly I can hear in my dark the flame he carries under wing, diving from pine to ash. I drink myself dumb on the back porch, wait all evening for the spark to leap from that damned flicker. When it does, it lands in my cocktail, hissing against the ice, just as you call to say you wish I had driven over. Temptation speeds across the state, slams head on into my slur. Now hear me search for and curse the landmarks in my dark. Listen to the radio signal break apart. I'm roaring off into a midnight blackout. Just rolling along. Cold Buddha. What's a moment for that cold Buddha of a mountain? The chickadees dripping through his cedar, the spider in his beak, the white sun shattering against the bellied side of his rainbow, the pebbly wink in his creek, and me straining to see through his cloud bank. It ought to come with a few wet naps. Am I right? Did you just glimpse the end of the world, the dish best served hot and slick in my chateau? You may taste it. Oh, I'd name a republic after you. Slip into the hibernation of bearskin rug, nod into icy glass eyes. Be the flame, locked door, drawn blinds, long, dark. I think of it as mine. I think of it as ours. I never think of it as yours. the plate before us, lapped up, licked clean? Should I take your panting for a smile? You need it. Eat this mint. We are being wined and dined. At the same time, it has value. It doesn't make us feel like cheapskates. The special. Understanding. She said each stone has a face. I walked while even in that sand she was dancing, finding the agates and the sea glass, the perfectly worn bits of shell. Later, at a stoplight, a honeybee soft toiling on a thistle stunned her. She imagined we must all return to the shore, those small treasures we've beachcombed throughout our lives. The view from our bed in the hotel suite was spectacular. The sliding glass door to the balcony, a jeweler's loop bearing light into the room. She yoga posed in cobra, nude, framed by sunset, reflecting off the ocean. The waves crashed against her legs, her arched back. Here's a holiday poem. You know, it's practically Christmas, right? I was in Walmart yesterday, and they had all the Christmas shit set up. Black Friday night. My jade plant start loves the logic of street lamp. She wants to prosper, to grow under the moonlight. She wants to shine off the gleam in the snow. She feels what I feel, burning in the soft electric glow from the Christmas lights across the road. She wants to bloom. For her, during even the darkest hours, I will leave up the blinds. She wants to sing her delicate white stars through my steamy window and out into the midnights of a blessed and fortunate new year. Am I going too fast? In this next poem, trepanation, trepanning, refers to the mostly antiquated medical practice of boring through the skull to expose the brain in an effort to alleviate illness. It's also a mining tool used for sinking mine shafts. This is called the Old Country. When they trepanned me, I saw blue, green, yellow, and violet over the gray hill, past the river of history beating, enormous and copper. Folk from the bloody town fill their pockets with pennies. No one returns. The Old Country is where they go, if you believe the postcards, which say that even though the Old Country is bloody just like our town, and the ash of revolution clouds every fiery sunset, still you can hear a song in each cold kernel of glass, a bloody song with a bloody chorus. So why do the townspeople descend into the copper mine? Why are their postcards so jubilant? I have pennies in a pickle jar. They belong to my grandmother. Her thoughts are rusting through my eyes, the ochre in my lungs, the lacquer on my bones, the people in my town, and those who left are humming. I taste iron and clay mud. I smell roses and rotting wood. That actually came out of Chris's surrealism class at Eastern. He had us, it was a prompt. You had to write a poem about the color red without ever mentioning the color red. So that's where that came from. Yeah. The lilac. Her loamy eyes weld this scent, this sweet chill, a story the bees tell before sunset, adrift in the air toward the trembling diamond spiderweb and back. this lilac breeze, a memory whispered once by our mother, the coffin's promise of a land where nothing goes to waste, this buzz of spring, this stumble, the fingers of the lawn reaching past the hawthorn, through the elm's papery fruit, the lilac's little trumpets pouring forth damp light, flush with chlorophyll, honeyed and ascending to purple, soft as satin trim. Rat, Rattus norvegicus. On his coat of arms, the wormy apple and barn cat. His robes of night so royal, the purple's black. Herald of science, prophet of medicine. In the corner of my eye, he sees his reflection. At arm's length, he's kept me his cousin. My cousin always building his nest within the pink sound of my voice. My heavy sleep, a crumb-like gift, a winter dream in the pantry, the only song I have for sharing this warmth in the walls. I should also say that's going to be in an anthology, Heart of the Rat, all poems and other pieces of fiction and nonfiction dedicated to rats, edited by Chris. My warmest coat. Little Miss Slenderfat knocked on my door one winter night in the middle of last summer. She placed a call, powdered her button nose, used my convenience. When I left the parlor to still and quiet the kettle, she stole my only goat, let him off at the end of my favorite rope. My favorite rope. She eloped into the cold oak forest, and all I could hope was that she'd also stolen my warmest coat. Sorry, I laughed at my own poem. Dang it, it's clever. My friend Nate, he moved, he about a year, maybe 2 years ago, he moved from Portland out to the Corbett area. I don't know. I know you guys are from all over the place. I don't know if anybody knows that side of the state, Corbett. It's a really neat area. It backs up to the Bull Run watershed and Mount Hood. Anyways, I wrote this on the occasion of visiting his new place. It's called Where is Ames, Oregon, for Nate. It's beside the culvert where the mossy gnome lives, where the watershed daughters find earthworms under the splitting block, where the six-toed cat stalks trout fry and mother salmonberry wends the path from the shade of Penny Pond to the creek. It's along the bank where the Indian plum grows, where water striders polish the surface of puddles, where the ground is thinking, where the fog drip makes the dug fir want to turn quartz, where Father Mushroom builds a chicken coop on the side of the house, and Fancy, the lonely peahen, looks for her reflection in a scrapped storm window. This is called Pickling Song. She's washing mason jars, cutting dill, scrubbing cucumbers, bringing the brine to a boil. It's a process, a short season's worth of salt, a sea of apple cider vinegar. She's hearing the song. I peel the garlic from her mother's garden. Fat, earth-encrusted bulbs cling to thick, fibrous necks. The largest cloves slip from their papery skins, polished white jade wet with green light. She's puzzled the cucumbers into their shells, and now in flows her brine. I twist on the lids, flip the jars, and line them up along the edge of the great countertop. The hum of an ancient mantra presses through the half smile of her lips. I can almost make out a melody. three more quick ones for you. This is letting the evening come. Like dad out of work, like the backyard, like the old German lady who lived in the bramble, like a possum or a stray, like spare change, like a paper route, like high school, like a car and a party, like a reliable connection, like the smoky windows and creamy leather interior of a Cadillac, like a dark road, like losing the bullet, like beating a rap, like winning a bet, like filet and lobster tail, like taking French leave, French wine, French kiss, like a renaissance, like you always knew the way home, like the belly of a beautiful woman, like a cat, like bone china, like a cup of tea, like walking along the sound, like sea glass and tumbled stones, like returning to the hummingbird and a wet garden, like clover, like a pear tree, like a blanket and a rainbow, like letting the evening come, like the moment and its spell of stillness under which we fall. What you mean is the ritual. What you mean is the way skunk and coyote create the night on your street, the way crow and squirrel dream daylight in your yard. It's the ritual you mean, that fondness pressing your life into grassy lawn, touching your death to each cool stone. What you mean, we have access without pretense, on the trail, in the creek, with the earth. This old new land is personal. Notice the spider's thread holding everything in place. So the girlfriend's folks live over in Pendleton. They have a nice little piece of property. It's got a small pond and some trees and stuff. They also have an old cider press. A couple of the slats have been replaced, but mostly it's the original like wood and hand-forged steel. I was over there a few weekends back and I wrote this poem. I should say that I had also just read David's excellent poem, Tithe. So, yeah. This is a 100-year-old cider press. The ants turn to gravel where we cross back with baskets of Arkansas blacks. Our heads have been chopped off for ages. We know this road ends at Pomace and Spill. Forget our names. Gather more yellow jackets. We're a mess. Cut, ground, pressed, sloshed, strained through old stockings. But still we froth and laugh in the yard, born again and again into October. Thank you.
Well, the student who gave that rating must have gotten an A. Anyway, probably. I'd like to thank David for the introduction. I'd also like to thank the Creative Writing Program for inviting me here to read tonight. It's been really great getting to work alongside you, and I really think that you bring a vibrancy to this small writing community that we have here in Eastern Oregon. I'm also, of course, honored to share the stage with my fellow reader, Orion. And I'm going to be reading a selection from a story that was published in Kalaloo called American Studies. And this is, I guess I'll just preface it's based on, largely based on the experience I had in the Peace Corps in the country of Lesotho. So, American Studies. After he pointed at the honeycomb tripe at the back of the cooler, Vincent completed the order by asking for a small rack of beef short ribs. The one thing familiar, meaty and whole. When the tripe was pulled out to weigh it, it looked strangely artificial, pale and geometric, and he worried that no matter how his father prepared it with spices, breading, or hot oil, that it would still be unmistakably tripe. He had assured his father he would order everything on the list, and the ribs were an addition of compromise, if not an ultimatum. The elderly man next to him, waiting for a selection of bratwurst, looked at the stomach lining curiously, and Victor turned away embarrassed. The butcher next held up the halved beef heart, the hollows of the aorta and the ventricles, dark and smooth. "Don't sell too many of these," the butcher admitted. "Hopefully this will be the last time for me," Vincent said. "For curry?" he asked. "Something like that," he offered. Vincent took the packages, the brown butcher paper and twine hiding its contents, but the organ still felt slack and strange as he set them in the bag. He walked over to the small shelf where the spice rubs and homemade line of sauces were displayed, wondering if this dinner his father had planned would be an end of the journey of recovery, and that with his healing, life would soon return to normal. At first, when his father suggested a second attempt dinner, Vincent had protested that it had been enough. It had begun when he had fallen and broken his arm outside the restaurant. When his father emerged from the hospital, he had insisted that they drive to the storage unit south of downtown Minneapolis to retrieve a few boxes, calling out which ones to take in, a voice still dampened by the painkillers. Vincent carried each for approval as his father sat in the front of the car, his hand running over the red cast for a moment before he removed a large aluminum pot and bags of samp and rice, suddenly eager again to cook goat and porridge and to start drinking tea that was too sweet. Vincent had accepted this, willing to try the first attempt of goat that ended up too gamey, or the samp that was bland until he added sorghum syrup. The fixation only increased as his father returned to the unit alone, finding a trunk of clothing, his heavy Lamu staff, and rolled up batiks that had been shipped from uncles and aunts in Lesotho long ago. He began wearing gumboots with the tops rolled down, and the drab coveralls he had worn in the diamond mines in Kimberley, favoring now the accordion music that droned on the tracks of found cassette tapes, reading old letters in his chair, searching online for the latest news from the kingdom, suddenly laughing and talking to himself, his injury abating in those long moments. After the first week, Vincent let his acceptance settle, thinking it was an early stage of recovery, while still hoping he would find his father listening to jazz or drinking his favorite beer alongside takeout Ethiopian after a long week waiting at the Red Fur. But it only continued, and he would be startled to find his father stick dancing in the living room or trying to cook chicken feet in a too small pan on the stove. Vincent then began to worry that the neighbors might hear the music and the dancing, smell the cooking, or even worse, see his father emerge from the condo wearing a traditional blanket, that in some way his father would embarrass them both. In his quieter moments of deep reflection and quick storytelling that his father would break into when he visited, Vincent did his best to remember each dish, or the way the music sounded, or the story of how the rivers were made, or how children would chase after ghosts in the field. And yet these memories remained elusive, each time pulling away when he glimpsed them in his thoughts, seeking and grasping to try and understand his father and his injury that had changed him, a change now suddenly unable to be stitched like flesh or knit like bone. When he dropped the meat off at the condo, his father had a shopping bag full of spices and vegetables, the contents as unfamiliar as a tripe and heart. "Just like at home," he said, holding up a bottle of tomato chutney and a tin of aromat. "You ate this for the first time with Barroso and rice when we visited your mother's family in the border town." "This has nothing but MSG in it," Vincent said, reading the label. "And there's a lot of sodium, too. This won't go at all with your medicine, Dad. You should just cook the meat with some wine or some broth or something. Besides, if you do that, it might help Lori and me forget we're eating tripe, which would be a huge plus." "It'll be fine," his father insisted. "I'll only use a little after cooking the meat with tomatoes and onion, and no one will be the wiser. You'll see. I'll be the wiser. You'll see how good it is then." Vincent felt like protesting again, but noticing his father's eyes were suddenly gleaming and wet with memory as he held the items and turned the bottle of hot sauce in his hand before setting it on the counter. "I could try using that sauce with the ribs then," he offered finally. "I remember having it at Uncle Lorato's a few years back at one of his barbecues. It has a nice kick to it." "My father brought a bottle with him every time we went to Maseru," his father remembered. "We would take a car straight from the taxi rank. We called them 4+1s, you know, and go to the shop and eat big city fried chicken and papa, My mother hated it. She said it was too spicy. Most Basutu prefer their food salty, or even just plain, but my brother and I both loved it. I remember even one time when we were standing in line behind a bunch of American workers and we saw King Mashweshwe drive by, his long black car slowing down to almost a stop as he waved. You've told me this story before, Dad, Vincent said. I'm sure it was quite something to see. It was something all right, he agreed. I'll see you tomorrow then, Vincent said, picking up the empty bag and the thermos of sweet tea his father had made. Lori texted and said she was excited, but that doesn't mean you need to go overboard. We'll stay on board, he promised. As Vincent closed the door, he heard the sound of the accordion and the guitar, and then the harsh cry of the singers rise up before falling once more. Looking both ways down the line of condos, he saw only darkness, and the music faded as he walked down the stairs, suddenly surrounded by silence. The following evening, his father was cutting the heart and tripe, both in the long strips, while standing in the kitchen wearing the dark gray kobo pinned at the shoulder when Vincent entered. The gray blanket seemed cleaned, and the even pattern of ears of corn stitched across the heavy fabric was newly visible. Vincent listened as his father sang softly in Sesotho, lifting his shoulders in rhythm as he opened the refrigerator to remove 2 onions. Do you need a hand with anything? Vincent asked, setting his messenger bag down and pushing back the hood of his maroon Gophers sweatshirt. I can manage just fine, his father said. This cast doesn't just come off when you're not here. I know that, Dad, Vincent said, shaking his head. I thought you said Lori was going to be here early too, his father continued, peeling each bulb with the paring knife. She told me she wanted to learn how to make papa this time, unlike some people. She's still in lab, Vincent answered, opening the bottle of red wine that was sitting on the counter, working on something with polypeptides. Sounds serious, he said, slicing each onion in half. How were your classes today, by the way? I just had American Studies, Vincent answered, pouring the wine into the pot until it covered the ribs. We're reading about the early New York jazz era now, listening to a lot of music, reading song lyrics, writing essays. Jazz sounds a bit more appealing than polypeptides, he said, laughing. I still wish Lori could be here for this. The papa is perfect this time. I suppose I could just email her the recipe if she's still interested. I'm sure she's still interested, Dad, Vincent assured. You could also just tell her the secret recipe at dinner. I could do that too. Are you really going to wear that when Lori is here? Vincent asked, reaching out to touch the blanket. I don't see why not. She's going to think you've gone off the deep end, Dad, he said. It's already kind of weird when it's just you and me. You can tell her that it's the Basutu way, he said, that it's part of our culture and tradition, just like this food, just like you and me. I think she'll understand. She wouldn't say otherwise, Vincent admitted. It just seems like you've been on this whole Basutu history lesson pretty seriously lately. I told you that I've been thinking a lot about home ever since the accident, he said, frowning. I know that, Vincent admitted quietly. I just worry sometimes, that's all. If you think Lori will mind, I'll take it off. It's fine, he said with a groan. She'll probably think it's cool. I'm pretty cool. I need to go finish this introductory paragraph to post online, Vincent said, but I can come back and help in a bit. Go on, his father said, waving at him with the knife. Go on and write about this American Studies. You can learn about how to be a proper Masutu when Lori is here and I'm teaching you how to cook papa and moroho. If you're lucky, I may even teach you a thing or two about jazz. Vincent lifted his messenger bag and walked down the hallway to the office that had once been his bedroom. He smiled when he noticed the remaining glow-in-the-dark sticker constellations that still spiraled out across the ceiling. The room now only had a small desk and chair and the same old Apple computer. Spread out on the carpeted floor beneath the single window was a map of Lesotho, and as Vincent pulled the chair back, he looked at it, noticing the long braid of the Senhu and the fine contours of the many mountains and the few roads that followed along uneven ridgelines. In the southern district, the point near the border of South Africa was circled twice in red ink, and he noticed the small cursive print where his father had marked the village. Vincent swallowed as he brought the map closer, the name of the village suddenly sticking in his throat, the pronunciation and the words thick and heady. He touched the point on the map and remembered how his uncle had told him about the shooting and how everything had changed after that. He closed his eyes and tried to remember, but all he could think of was the tall grass bending in the wind and the sound of men shouting loudly, and then the sudden fire and smoke. And then he was unsure, and then he could think of nothing at all. His father was asleep in the reclining chair when Vincent reemerged, the remote control fallen to the floor, and the television muted but flashing scenes of the oil rig still burning in the Gulf of Mexico. Vincent noticed that the kobo was folded neatly across the armrest and moved to drape it over his father. In the kitchen, he drank a glass of wine and studied the pot of tripe slowly simmering in a broth with onions and crushed tomatoes. He was relieved when the smell was not as strong as the goat and that the organs looked less organy than he had expected. He rinsed out the glass and then went and sat on the couch next to his sleeping father, who held his injured arm cradled across his chest. The cast bracing his forearm was a washed-out red now, but there was still a drawing of a mocoroclo just inside the inner wrist. His father had told him that the woven hat had been inspired by Mount Kelewani, and that the topography and symbols were marks of Basuto identity. After the first sketch, he had taken the drawing and the hats on pieces of paper that now littered the condo, mumbling about how the crown at the peak was never the way he meant it to be. This, along with other recent changes, were the reasons Vincent worried that his father was sicker than he let on, that the broken arm was perhaps symptomatic of a deeper ailment. The injury had been minimal, and the resulting infection came as a surprise and precursor to his father spending several days bedridden after the fall. Vincent stayed with him for the first few days, bringing him oatmeal and tuna fish sandwiches and chicken noodle soup and peppermint tea with honey. It was during this time that he first began to notice how his father would speak in Sesotho as he napped until the late afternoon, his body turning and unsteady beneath the sheets. He would cry out finally, and after a few moments go still, his fists unclenching and his breathing becoming more regular. Vincent was unsure of what to do at first, but he confronted his father about it and suggested that he visit his general practitioner for a more thorough exam. His father had grumbled and then said that the antibiotics and painkillers he was taking were causing him to dream vividly about home, and that it was a healing he needed beyond the fracture. He promised that he was already stronger and that his mind was clearer than it had been before, and that there was nothing to worry about. His father had been noticeably quiet the following night as they sat in the living room watching the basketball tournament. And he told Vincent that it was time for him to return home to his apartment near campus. And he promised that he would keep him apprised, but he needed to be alone to heal. It was shortly after that when his father returned to the storage unit and began to more actively change, unpacking the photographs of mountain landscapes, a collection of Basuto poems, the kobo blanket and gumboots, the mocoroclo hats, and 2 idols carved from teak, each item a sign of an unwillingness to let those recently renewed memories of home so easily fade. He grew serious when he asked Vincent to invite Lori to dinner a few weeks later, insisting that he wanted her to be a part of his recovery. When Vincent had left the condo the previous evening, after agreeing to the tripe and heart and the dinner itself, his father had already begun to prepare, flicking his hand as he searched through a makeshift binder of loose recipes while speaking to his brother on the phone in animated Sesotho. His excitement for the upcoming dinner warming his face, his eyes wide and quickly moving across the pages. It was as though the promise of the shared memory of home had already begun to sate him, that the idea of the past they had both lost could now emerge from the pots and pans to color and fill the white plates with new stories, and memories that he could impart a touch of sweetness and heat that would be lasting. Vincent leaned over and touched his father's hand, the thin fingers dry and hard from work. He wished he could remember more of Lesotho. The village of Ha'insu had remained more fixed in his memory. He could then share those stories with his father and find that common ground where there was presently a yawning cultural divide. A few days after his father had begun to routinely wear the kobo or coveralls around the condo, he'd begun to cook only Basuto food, spending a whole day and half a paycheck visiting markets for the search of maize meal, sorghum, canned peas, and polony, insisting that each purchase took his mind off the disability of his injury, and that these routines from the past had given him a renewed curative. Frustrated by this behavior and an unwavering rationale, Vincent had gone to the Wilson Library and found several books on Lesotho history to try to come to terms with the changes. As he flipped through the pages and searched the online databases, he realized that his homeland still seemed so startlingly foreign to him, and how even when scattered across the screen were the stories of his fathers, that these were not his. Vincent remembered how he had asked his father about what had happened in the village when he was younger and drawing an autobiographical tree of his childhood for second grade presentations at Excelsior. Instead of drawing the condo in Minnetonka, he had copied the rendezvous from the few photographs shared by his uncle with crayons, and added a picture of his mother and father standing beside a muddy river. But even then, he was only drawing from the memory of the few stories he had heard as he lay in bed beneath those glow-in-the-dark constellations from his father. He did not remember his mother before she had been sick and died, nor the village he had drawn for the assignment. When he had asked about the other photographs, his father had become guarded, but had promised to tell Vincent about what had happened when he was older. No one questioned the history that he had drawn on those pages in bright yellows and greens and browns as he stood in front of the class. And as he sat there in the library, the deception of those pages was all he could hold on to. The memory caused Vincent to turn away from the textbooks and the laptop and realize that he was still only confused and upset. All the ways his father had begun to act seemed not even Basutu, but just African to him. That in his private displays of memory, his father was rejecting everything that made them both American. Vincent realized now that the memory he should have drawn for the presentation were images of the brick condo, or of the walks they took around Lake Calhoun, or the time they visited the state fair with his uncle and his aunt and his cousin and ate fried Twinkies and shared a foot-long hot dog. Those were the real memories he could color and diagram. He left the textbooks on the return cart and walked out onto the quad, wondering if he broke something inside, that if his memory of childhood could be fractured by the pain of a fall, that he might then find the past and let it heal anew in his mind, as ever vibrant and alive as it had for his father. Thanks.